No, strange things are afoot with the mail service. Aliens took it, Melissa? Could be. Okay, let's do it. Chapter 10, here we go. Alan woke early the next morning, but it was Rat, not Hawks, who pulled him out of sleep. The little extraterrestrial was nibbling on his ear. Bleary-eyed, Alan sat up and blinked. "Oh, it's you. I thought you were on a silent strike."
"There wasn't anything I wanted to say, so I kept quiet. But I want to say some things now, before your new friend wakes up."
The Bellatrician had been silent all the past evening, tagging along behind Alan and Hawks like a faithful pet, but keeping his mouth closed. "Well, go ahead and say them, then," Alan told him.
"I don't like this fellow, Hawks. I think you're in for trouble if you stick with him."
"He's going to take me to the Atlas to get Steve."
"You can get to the Atlas yourself. He's given you all the help you'll need."
Alan shook his head. "I'm no baby. I can take care of myself, without your help." The little alien creature shrugged.
"Suit yourself. But I'll tell you one thing, Alan. I'm going back to the Valhalla, whether you are or not. I don't like Earth, or Hawks either. Remember that."
"Who said I was staying here? Didn't you hear me bet Max that I'd go back?"
"I heard you. I say you're going to lose that bet. I say this Hawks is going to fast-talk you into staying here, and if I had any need for money, I'd put it down a side bet on Hawks' side."
Alan laughed. "You think you know me better than I know myself? I never for a minute thought of jumping ship."
"Has my advice ever steered you wrong? I'm older than you are, Alan, and 10 or 20 times smarter. I can see where you're heading, and—"
Alan grew suddenly angry. "Nag, nag, nag. You're worse than an old woman. Why don't you keep quiet the way you did last night and leave me alone? I know what I'm doing, and when I want your advice, I'll ask for it."
"Have it your way,"
Rat said. His tone was mildly reproachful. Alan felt abashed at having scolded the little alien that way, but he did not know how to make proper amends. Besides, he was annoyed at Rat's preachiness. He and Rat had been together too long. The Bellatrician probably thought he was still only 10 years old, and in need of constant advice. He rolled over and went back to sleep. About an hour later, he was awakened again, this time by Hawks. He dressed, and they ate. Good, real food, no synthetics, served by Hawks' auto chef, and then set out for the Atlas Games Parlor, 68th Avenue and 423rd Street in Upper York City. The time was 13:27 when they emerged on the street. Hawks assured him that Steve would already be at work. Most unsuccessful gamblers started making the rounds of the parlors in the early afternoon. They took the undertube back to the heart of the city and kept going, into the suburb of Upper York. Getting out at the 423rd Street terminal, they walked briskly through the narrow, crowded streets toward 68th Avenue. When they were a block away, Alan spotted the sign, blinking on and off in watery red letters. Atlas Games Parlor. A smaller sign proclaimed the parlor's Class C status, which allowed any mediocre player to make use of its facilities. As they drew near, Alan felt a tingle of excitement. This was what he had come to the Earther City for in the first place, to find Steve. For weeks he had been picturing the circumstances of this meeting. Now it was about to take place. The Atlas was similar to the other games parlor where Alan had had the set to... What? Okay. The Atlas was similar to the other games parlor where Alan had had the set to with the robo-huckster. It was dark-windowed, and a shining blue robot stood outside, urging passers-by to step inside and try their luck. Alan moistened his dry lips. He felt cold and numb inside. He won't be there, he thought. He won't be there. Hawkes took a wad of bills from his wallet. "Here's 200 credits for you, to use at the tables while you're looking around. I'll have to wait outside. There'd be a royal uproar if a Class A man ever set foot inside a place like the Atlas." Alan smiled nervously. He was pleased that Hawkes was unable to come with him. He wanted to handle the problem by himself, for a change. And he was not anxious for the gambler to witness the scene between him and Steve. If Steve were inside, that is. He nodded tightly and walked toward the door. The robo-huckster outside chatted at him. "Come right on, sir. Step inside. 5 credits can get you 100 here. Right this way." "I'm going," Alan said. He passed the photo beam and into the games parlor. Another robot came sliding up to him and scanned his features. "This is a Class C establishment, sir. If your card is any higher than Class C, you cannot compete here. Would you mind showing me your card, sir?" "I don't have any. I'm an unrated beginner." That was what Hawkes had told him to say. "I'd like a single table, please." He was shown to a table to the left of the croupier's booth. The Atlas was a good bit dingier than the Class A parlor he had been in the night before. Its electroluminescent light panels fizzed and sputtered, casting uncertain shadows here and there. A round was in progress. Figures were bent busily over their boards, altering their computations and changing their light patterns. Alan slid a 5-credit piece into the slot and, while waiting for the round to finish and the next to begin, looked around at his fellow patrons. In the semi-dark that prevailed, it was difficult to make out faces. He would have trouble recognizing Steve. A musky odor hung low over the hall, sweet, pungent, yet somehow unpleasant. He realized he had experienced that odor before and tried to remember. Yes, last night in the other games parlor he had smelled a wisp of the fragrance, and Hawkes had told him it was a narcotic cigarette. It lay heavy in the stale air of the Class C parlor. Patrons stared with fanatic intensity at the racing pattern of lights before them. Alan glanced from one to the next. A bald head, whose dome glinted bright gold in the dusk, knotted his hands together in an anguish of indecision. A slim, dreamy-eyed young man gripped the sides of the table frenziedly as the numbers spiraled upward. A fat woman in her late 40s, hopelessly dazed by the intricate game, slumped wearily in her seat. Dr. B Games, you don't have a YouTube when you don't have a... Are you having issues with it, or you just found that little emoji to use? I hope the connection's okay. Let's back up a sentence here. A fat woman in her late 40s, hopelessly dazed by the intricate game, slumped wearily in her seat. Beyond that he could not see. There were other patrons on the far side of the rostrum. Perhaps Steve was over there. But it was forbidden for anyone to wander through the rows of tables searching for a particular player. The gong rang, ending the round. "Number 322 wins 100 credits, barked the croupier. The man at table 322 shambled forward for his money. He walked with a twisted shuffle. His body shook palsidly. Hawkes had warned him of these, too, the dream dust addicts, who in the late stages of their addiction became hollow shells of men, barely able to walk. He took his 100 credits and returned to his table without smiling. Alan shuddered and looked away. Earth was not a pretty world. Life was good if you had the stream running with you, as Hawkes did. But for each successful one like Hawkes, how many fought unsuccessfully against the current and were swept away into dream dust? or worse. Steve. He looked down the row for Steve. And then the board lit up again, and for the first time he was playing. He set up a tentative pattern. Golden streaks flitted across the board, mingling with red and blue blinkers. Then the first number came. Alan integrated it hastily and realized he had constructed a totally worthless pattern. He wiped his board clean and set up new figures based on the one number he had. Already, he knew, he was hopelessly far behind the others. But he kept with it as the minutes crawled past. Sweat dribbled down his face and neck. He had none of Hawke's easy confidence with the board's controls. This game was hard work for a beginner. Later, perhaps, some of the steps would become automatic, but now... 78, sub 12 over 13, came the droning instructions, and Alan pulled levers and twisted ratchets to keep his pattern true. He saw the attraction the game held for the people of Earth. It required such deep concentration, such careful attention, that one had no time to ponder other problems. It was impossible to think and compete at the same time. The game offered perfect escape from the harsh realities of Earther existence. 612 Sigma 5. Again Alan recompensated. His nerves tingled. He felt he must be close to victory. All thought of what he had come here for slipped away. Steve was forgotten. Only the flashing board counted, only the game. 5 more numbers went by. Suddenly the gong rang, indicating that someone had achieved a winning pattern, and it was like the fall of a headsman's axe to Alan. He had lost. That was all he could think of. He had lost. The winner was the dreamy-eyed youth at table 166, who accepted his winnings without a word and took his seat. As Alan drew out another 5-credit piece for the next round, he realized what he was doing. He was being caught up in the nerve-stretching excitement of the game. He was forgetting Steve, forgetting the waiting Hawks outside. He stretched back in his seat and peered as far down the row as he could see. No sign of Steve there. He had to be on the other side of the croupier. Alan decided to do his best to win. That way he could advance to the rostrum and scan the other half of the hall. But the game fled by too quickly. He made a false computation on the 11th number and watched in dismay as his pattern drew further and further away from the numbers being called off. He drove himself furiously, trying to make amends, but it was impossible. The winner was the man at table 217 on the other side. He was a lantern-jawed giant with the powerful frame of a longshoreman, and he laughed in pleasure as he collected his money. 3 more rounds went by. Alan picked up increasing skill at the game, but failed to win. He saw his shortcoming, but could not do anything to help it. He was unable to extrapolate ahead. Hawks was gifted with the knack of being able to extend probable patterns 2 or 3 moves into the future. Alan could only work with the given, so he never made the swift series of guesses which led to victory. He had spent nearly an hour in the parlor now, fruitlessly. The next round came and went. "Table 111 takes us for 150 credits, came the croupier's cry. Alan relaxed, waiting for the lucky winner to collect and for the next round to begin. The winner reached the centrally located rostrum. Alan looked at him. He was tall, fairly young, in his 30s perhaps, with stooped shoulders and a dull glazedness about his eyes. He looked familiar. Steve. Feeling no excitement now that the quest had reached success, Alan slipped from his seat and made his way around the croupier's rostrum and down the far aisle. Steve had already taken his seat at table 111. Alan came up behind him, just as the gong sounded to signal the new round. Steve was hunched over the board, calculating with almost desperate fury. Alan touched his shoulder. "Steve." Without looking up, Steve snapped, "Get out of here, whoever you are. Can't you see I'm busy?" "Steve, I—" A robot sidled up to Alan and grasped him firmly by the arm. "It is forbidden to disturb the players while they are engaged in the game. We will have to eject you from this parlor." Angrily, Alan broke loose from the robot's grasp and leaned over Steve. He shook him by the shoulder, roughly, trying to shake loose his mind from the flickering games board. "Steve, look up. It's me, Alan, your brother." Steve slapped at Alan's hand as he would a fly. Alan saw other robots converging on him from various points in the room. In a minute, they'd hurl him out into the street. Recklessly, he grabbed Steve by the shoulders and spun him around in his seat. A curse tumbled from Steve's lips. Then he fell strangely silent. "You remember me, Steve? Your brother, Alan. Your twin brother. Once." Steve had changed, certainly. His hair was no longer thick and curly. It seemed to have straightened out and darkened a little. Wrinkles seamed his forehead. His eyes were deep-set and surrounded by lines. He was slightly overweight, and it showed. He looked terribly tired. Looking at him was like looking at a comic mirror that distorted and altered your features. But there was nothing comic about Steve's appearance. In a hoarse whisper, he said, "Alan." "Yes." Alan felt robot arms grasping him firmly. He struggled to break loose and saw Steve trying to say something, only no words were coming. Steve was very pale. "Let go of him," Steve said finally. He wasn't disturbing me." "He must be ejected. It is the rule." Conflict traced deep lines on Steve's face. "All right, then, we'll both leave." The robots released Alan, who rubbed his arms ruefully. Together they walked up the aisle and out into the street. Hawks stood waiting there. "I see you found him. It took long enough." "Max, this is my brother, Stephen Donnell." Alan's voice was shaky with tension. "Steve, this is a friend of mine, Max Hawks." "You don't need to tell me who he is," Steve said. His voice was deeper and harsher than... that would have been nice to know earlier. His voice was deeper and harsher than Alan remembered it. "Every gamesman knows Hawks. He's the best there is." In the warm daylight, Steve looked even older than the 26 that was his chronological age. To Alan's eyes, he seemed to be a man who had been kicked around by life, a man who had not yet given up but knew he didn't stand much of a chance for the future. And he looked ashamed. The old sparkle was gone from his brother's eyes. Quietly, Steve said, "Okay, Alan, you tracked me down. Call me whatever names you want to call me and let me get about my business. I don't do quite as well as your friend Hawks, and I happen to be in a need of a lot of cash in a hurry." I didn't come to call you names. "Let's go someplace where we can talk," Alan said. "There's a lot for us to talk about." That was chapter 10. Man, okay, so this Hawks guy, his, I don't know, his name seems to precede him. Very nice, very nice. Alrighty. We'll get on with chapter 11 in just a minute. Very good. So far so good. Everyone's up to speed, I hope. Hope everyone's Wednesday is off to an awesome start as well. Wow, it's already 10:30 in the morning here. Good gracious. The day is going by. Okay, if you are enjoying the stream, by the way, would remind you that there are the little share buttons below the video. If you need to let your friends on Twitter or Facebook know the kind of show that you like watching. Here on YouTube, we're new to YouTube. We are new here. Been doing this for a few years, though, elsewhere. But here we are now. I'm just going to have a quick little sip of water here, and we'll get right into Chapter 11. Chapter 11. Very fast-moving book. That's what I like about pulpy sci-fi. It just really gets going. No time to slow down and wax romantic about things. Ah, there we go. Right. Chapter 11. They adjourned to a small tavern 3 doors down 68th Avenue from the games parlor, an old-fashioned tavern with manually operated doors and stuffed moose heads over the bar. Alan and Hawks took seats next to each other in a booth in the back. Steve sat facing them. The barkeep came scuttling out. No robot in here, just a tired-faced old man, and took their orders. Hawks called for beer, Steve for whiskey. Alan did not order. He sat staring at his brother's oddly changed face. Steve was 26. From Alan's 17-year-old vantage point, that seemed tremendously old, well past the prime of life. He said, "The Valhalla landed on Earth a few days ago. We're bound out for Procyon in a few days." "So?" "The captain would like to see you again, Steve." Steve stared moodily at his drink without speaking for a long moment. Alan studied him. Less than 2 months had passed for Alan since Steve had jumped ship. He still remembered how his twin had looked. There had been something smoldering in Steve's eyes then, a kind of rebellious fire, a smoky passion. That was gone now. It had burned out long ago. In its place, Alan saw only tiny red veins, the bloodshot eyes of a man who had been through a lot. Little of it very pleasant. Is that the truth?" Steve asked. "Would he like to see me? Or wouldn't he just prefer to think I was never born at all?" "Oh, no." "I know the captain, Dad, pretty well, even though I haven't seen him in 9 years. He'd never forgive me for jumping ship. I don't want to pay any visits to the Valhalla, Alan." "Well, who said anything about visiting?" "Then what were you talking about?" "I was talking about going back into the crew," Alan said quietly. The words seemed to strike Steve like physical blows. He shuddered a little and gulped down the drink he held clutched in tobacco-stained fingers. He looked up at Alan finally. "I can't. It's impossible. Flatly impossible." "But—" Alan felt Hawk's foot kick him sharply under the table. He caught the hint and changed the subject. There was time to return to it later. Okay, let's skip it for now. Why don't you tell me about your life on Earth these last 9 years?" Steve smiled sardonically. "There's not much to tell, and what there is a pretty dull story. I came across the bridge from the Enclave last time the Valhalla was in town, and came over into York City all set to conquer the world, become rich and famous, and live happily ever after. 5 minutes after I set foot on the Earther side of the river, well, I was beaten up and robbed by a gang of roving kids. It was a real fine start." He signaled the waiter for another drink. "I guess I must have drifted around the city for 2 weeks or more before the police found me and picked me up for vagrancy. By that time, the Valhalla had long since hoisted for Alpha C, and didn't I wish I was on it. Every night I used to dream I'd gone back on the ship, but when I woke up, I always found out I hadn't. The police gave me an education in the ways of Earther life, complete with rubber hoses and stingrays, and when they thought they were through with me, I knew all about the system of work cards and free status. I didn't have a credit to my name, so I drifted some more. Then I got sick of drifting and tried to find a job, but of course I couldn't buy my way into any of the hereditary guilds. Earth has enough people of her own. She's not interested in finding jobs for kid spacemen who jump ship. So I starved a little. Then I got tired of starving. So about a year after I first jumped ship, I borrowed 1,000 credits from somebody foolish enough to lend them and set myself up as a professional gambler on free status. It was the only trade I could find that didn't have any entrance requirements.
Did you do well?
Yeah, very well. At the end of my first 6 months, I was 1,500 credits in debt. Then my luck changed. I won 3,000 credits in a single month and got shifted up to Class B.
Steve laughed bitterly.
That was beautiful up there. Inside of 2 more months, I'd not only lost my 3,000, I was 2,000 more in hock. And that's the way it's been going ever since. I borrow here, win a little to pay him back, or lose a little and borrow from someone else. Win a little, lose a little, round and round and round. A swell life, Alan, and I still dream about the Valhalla once or twice a week.
Steve's voice was leaden, dreary.
Alan felt a surge of pity. The swashbuckling, energetic Steve he had known might still be in there, inside this man somewhere, but surrounding him were the scars of 9 bitter years on Earth. 9 years. It was a tremendous gulf. Alan caught his breath a moment. If you had the chance to go back into the crew, no strings attached, no recriminations, would you take it? For an instant, the old brightness returned to Steve's eyes. Of course I would, but...
But what?
I owe 7,000 credits, Steve said. And it keeps getting worse. That part I won today, just before you came over to me, that was the first take I'd had in 3 days. 9 years, and I'm still a Class C gambler. We can't all be as good as Hawks here. I'm lousy. But what other profession could I go into on an overcrowded and hostile world like this one?
7,000 credits, Alan thought. It was a week's earnings for Hawks, but Steve would probably be in debt the rest of his life.
Who do you owe this money to?
Hawks asked suddenly. Steve looked at him.
The Bryson Syndicate, mostly, and Lorne Hollis. The Bryson people keep a good eye on me, too. There's a Bryson man 3 booths up who follows me around. If they ever saw me going near the space field, they'd be pretty sure to cut me off and ask for their money. You can't welsh on Bryson. Suppose it was arranged that your debts be cancelled, Hawks said speculatively.
Steve shook his head.
No, I don't want charity. I know you're a Class A and 7,000 credits comes easy to you, but I couldn't take it. Skip it. I'm stuck here on Earth for keeps, and I'm resigned to it. I made my choice, and this is what I got.
Oh, listen to reason, Alan urged. Hawks will take care of the money you owe, and Dad will be so happy to see you come back to the ship again.
Like Mars, he'll be happy. See me come back, beaten up and ragged, a washed-out old man at 26. No, sir, the captain blotted me out of his mind a long time ago, and he and I don't have any further business together.
You're wrong, Steve. He sent me into the Earther City deliberately to find you. He said to me, "Find Steve and urge him to come back to the ship." He's forgiven you completely. Alan lied. Everyone's anxious to have you come back on board. For a moment, Steve sat silent, indecisive, frowning deeply. Then he made up his mind. He shook his head.
No, both of you. Thanks, but I don't want any. Keep your 7,000, Hawks. And you, Alan, go back to the ship and forget all about me. I don't even deserve a second chance.
Oh, you're wrong, Alan started to protest. But a second time, Hawks kicked him hard, and he shut up. He stared curiously at the gambler.
Well, I guess that about settles it, Hawks observed. If the man wants to stay, we can't force him.
Steve nodded.
I have to stay on Earth, and now I'd better get back to the games parlor. I can't waste any time, you know. Not with a 7,000 credit backlog to make up.
Oh, naturally. But there's time for one more drink, isn't there? On me.
Maybe you don't want my money, but... Oh, no, that's Hawks speaking. Okay.
Oh, naturally. But there's time for one more drink, isn't there? On me. Maybe you don't want my money, but let me buy you a drink.
Steve grinned.
Oh, fair enough.
He started to wave to the bartender. But Hawks... Wow, I'm stumbling over something. He started to wave to the bartender, but Hawks shot out an arm quickly and blocked off the gesture.
He's an old man and he's tired. I'll go to the bar and order.
And before Steve could protest, Hawks had slipped smoothly out of the booth and was on his way forward to the bar. Alan sat facing his brother. "Good morning, Anya. Good morning." "What is, what? Humble myself a little? Where? What? Who?" I'm confused. Oh, and before Steve could protest, Hawks had slipped smoothly out of the booth and was on his way forward to the bar. Alan sat facing his brother. He felt pity. Steve had been through a lot. The freedom he had longed for aboard ship had had a heavy price. And was it freedom to sit in a crowded games parlor on a dirty little planet and struggle to get out of debt? Oh, are you talking about Steve? Yeah, man, boy, talking about looking a gift horse in the mouth. Man, second chances like that don't come around often. And was it freedom to sit in a crowded games parlor on a dirty little planet and struggle to get out of debt? There was nothing further he could say to Steve. He had tried and he had failed, and Steve would remain on Earth. But it seemed wrong. Steve did deserve a second chance. He had jumped ship, and it had been a mistake, but there was no reason why he could not return to his old life, wiser for the experience. Still, if he refused... Hawks came back bearing 2 drinks, another beer for himself and a whiskey for Steve. He set them out on the table and said, "Well, drink up. Here's hoping you can make Class A and stay there."
Thanks,
Steve said, and drained his drink in a single loud gulp. His eyes widened. He started to say something, but never got the words out. He slumped down in his seat, and his chin thumped ringingly against the table. Alan looked at Hawks in alarm. What happened to him? Why'd he pass out?" Hawks smiled knowingly.
"Oh, an ancient Earth beverage known as the Mickey Fin. 2 drops of a synthetic enzyme in his drink. Tasteless, but extremely effective. He'll be asleep for 10 hours or more."
"How'd you arrange it?"
"Oh, I told the bartender it was in a good cause, and he believed me. You wait here now. I want to talk to that Bryson man about your brother's debts, and then we'll spirit him out to the spaceport and dump him aboard the Valhalla before he wakes up."
Alan grinned. He was going to have to do some explaining to Steve later, but by that time it would be too late. The starship would be well on its way to Procyon. It was a dirty trick to play, he thought, but it was justifiable. In Hawks' words, it was in a good cause. Alan put his arms around his brother's shoulders and gently lifted him out of the chair. Steve was surprisingly light, for all his lack of condition. Evidently, muscle weighed more than fat, and Steve had gone to fat. Supporting his brother's bulk without much trouble, Alan made his way towards the entrance to the bar. As he went past the bartender, the old man smiled at him. Alan wondered what Hawks had said to him. Right now, Hawks was 3 booths up, leaning over and taking part in an urgent whispered conference with a thin, dark-faced man in a sharply tailored suit. They reached some sort of agreement. There was a handshake. Then Hawks left the booth and slung one of Steve's dangling arms around his own shoulder, easing the weight.
"There's an undertube that takes us as far as Carhill Boulevard and the bridge," Hawks said. "We can get a ground vehicle there that'll go on through the Enclave and out to the space field."
The trip took nearly an hour. Steve sat propped up between Alan and Hawks, and every now and then his head would loll to one side or another, and he would seem to be stirring, but he never woke. The sight of two men dragging a third along between them attracted not the slightest attention as they left the undertube and climbed aboard the Spacefield bus. Apparently in York City no one cared much about what went on. It made no difference to the busy earthers whether Steve were unconscious or dead. The ground bus took them over the majestic arch of the bridge, rapidly through the sleepy enclave. Alan saw nobody he recognized in the streets, and through the restricted area that led to the space field. The spaceport was a jungle of ships, each standing on its tail, waiting to blast off. Most of them were small, two-man cargo vessels, used in travel between Earth and the colonies on the Moon, Mars, and Pluto, but here and there a giant starship loomed high above the others. Alan stood on tiptoes to search for the golden hull of the Valhalla, but he was unable to see it. Since the starship would be blasting off at the end of the week, he knew the crew was probably already at work on it, shaping it up for the trip. He belonged on it, too. He saw a dark green starship standing nearby, the Encounter, Kevin Quantrell's ship. Men were moving about busily near the big ship, and Alan remembered that it had become obsolete during its last voyage and was being rebuilt. A robot came sliding up to the three of them as they stood there at the edge of the landing field. "Can I help you, please?" "I'm from the starship Valhalla," Alan said. "I'm returning to the ship. Would you please take me to the ship, please?" "Of course." Alan turned to Hawks. The moment had come, much too suddenly. Alan felt Rat twitching at his cuff, as if reminding him of something. Grinning awkwardly, Alan said, "I guess this is the end of the line, Max. You'd better not go out on the space field with us. I sort of want to thank you for all the help you've given me. I never would have found Steve without you. And about the bet we made, well, it looks like I'm going back on my ship after all, so I've won 1,000 credits from you. But I can't ask for it, of course, not after what you did for Steve." He extended his hand. Hawks took it, but he was smiling strangely. "If I owed you the money, I'd pay it to you." If I owed you the money, I'd pay it to you," the gambler said. "That's the way I work. The 7,000 I paid for Steve is extra and above everything else, but you haven't won that bet yet. You haven't won it until the Valhalla's in space with you aboard it." The robot made signs of impatience. Hawks said, You'd better convoy your brother across the field and dump him on his ship. Save the goodbyes for later. I'll wait right here for you. Right here." Alan shook his head. "Sorry, Max, but you're wasting your time by waiting. The Valhalla has to be readied for blastoff, and once I check in aboard ship, I can't come back to visit. So this is goodbye right here." "We'll see about that," Hawks said. 10-1 odds. 10-1, Alan said, "and you've lost your bet." But his voice did not sound very convincing, and as he started off across the field with Steve dragging along beside him, he frowned and did some very intense thinking indeed in the few minutes it took him to arrive at the shining Valhalla. He was beginning to suspect that Hawks might be going to win the bet after all. That Hawks is definitely a bit of a slimy character. Seemed pretty nice at first, but you don't get something for nothing. I'm just going to have a wild guess here. Wild guess, and let's see. I would be thinking that in exchange for that 7,000, paying off that, he's now put it like a lien or something on the Valhalla ship, and the ship can't take off. The ship can't take off until that's been paid off. Man, I'm getting thirsty in this city. This booth is getting a little warm. All right, very good. Yeah, you got to be careful there, Mr. Blanton. Yeah. You just gotta know. Maybe Yeah. Don't want to be running around with a banhammer willy-nilly. Alrighty. Yeah. Okay, let's, let me back up a little. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Boy, I could do with a different chair in here, too, actually, now that I think about it. All right. Okay. Chapter 12. You didn't realize the guy in the book was... Which guy in the book? The, they found him. They did find... yeah. Yep, they found him. There's going to be some kind of payback. Alrighty. Chapter 12. He felt a little emotional pang, something like nostalgia as the Valhalla came into sight, standing by itself tall and proud at the far end of the field. A cluster of trucks buzzed around it, transferring fuel, bringing cargo. He spotted the wiry figure of Dan Kelleher, the cargo chief, supervising and shouting salty instructions to the perspiring men. Alan tightened his grip on Steve's arm and moved forward. Kelleher shouted, "You men back there, tighten up on that winch and give her a hoist. Tighten up, I say. Put some muscle into it." He broke off. "Alan," he said in a quiet voice. "Hello, Dan. Is my father around?" Kelleher was staring with frank curiosity at the slumped figure of Steve Donnell. "The captain's off watch now. Art Candon's in charge." "Thanks," Alan said. "I better go see him." "Sure. And—" Alan nodded. "Yes, that's Steve." He passed between the cargo hoists and clambered onto the escalator rampway that led to the main body of the ship. It rose, conveying him 70 feet upward and through the open passenger hatch to the inner section of the towering starfish. What? And through the open passenger hatch to the inner section of the towering starship. He was weary from having carried Steve so long. He put the sleeping form down against a window seat, facing one of the view screens, and said to Rat, "You stay here and keep watch. If anyone wants to know who he is, tell them the truth." "Right enough." Alan found Art Candon where he expected to find him. In the central control room, posting work assignments for the blast-off tomorrow. The lanky, pudgy-faced first officer hardly noticed as Alan stepped up beside him. "Art." Candon turned and went pale. "Oh, Alan, where in blazes have you been the last 2 days?" "Out in the Earther City. Did my father make much of a fuss?" The first officer shook his head. "He kept saying you went out to see the sights, that you hadn't really jumped ship. But he kept saying it over and over again, as if he really didn't believe it, as if he wanted to convince himself you were coming back." "Where is he now?" "In his cabin. He's off watch for the next hour or two. I'll ring him up and have him come down here, I guess." Alan shook his head. "No, don't do that. Tell him to meet me on B deck." He gave the location of the picture view screen where he had parked Steve, and Candon shrugged and agreed. Alan made his way back to the view screen. Rat looked up at him. He was sitting perched on Steve's shoulder. "Anyone bother you?" Alan asked. "No one's come by this way since you left," Rat said. "Alan," a quiet voice said. Alan turned. "Hello, Dad." The captain's lean, tough face had some new lines on it. His eyes were darkly shadowed, and he looked as if he hadn't slept much the night before. But he took Alan's hand and squeezed it warmly, in a fatherly way, not a captainly one. Then he glanced at the sleeping form behind Alan. "I went into the city, Dad, and found Steve." Something that looked like pain came into Captain Donnell's eyes, but only for an instant. He smiled. "It's strange, seeing the two of you like this. So you brought back Steve, eh? We'll have to put him back on the roster. Why is he asleep? He looks like he's out cold." He is. It's a long story, Dad." You'll have to explain it to me later, then, after blastoff. Alan shook his head. No, Dad. Steve can explain it when he wakes up tonight. Steve can tell you lots of things. I'm going back to the city. What? It was easy to say now. The decision that had been taking vague form for several hours, and which had crystallized as he trudged across the space field toward the Valhalla. I brought you back Steve, Dad. You still have one son aboard ship. I want off. I'm resigning. I want to stay behind on Earth. By our charter, you can't deny such a request. Captain Donnell moistened his lips slowly. Agreed. I can't deny. But why, Alan? I think I can do more good, Earthside. I want to look for Cavour's old notebooks. I think he developed the hyperdrive, and if I stay behind on Earth, maybe I can find it. Or else I can build my own. So long, Dad. And tell Steve that I wish him luck, and that he'd better do the same for me. He glanced at Rat. Rat, I'm deeding you to Steve. Maybe if he had had you instead of me, he never would have jumped ship in the first place. He looked around, at his father, at Steve, at Rat. There was not much else he could say, and he knew that if he prolonged the farewell scene too long, he'd only be burdening his father and himself with the weight of sentimental memory. We won't be back from Procyon for almost 20 years, Alan. You'll be 37 before we return to Earth again. Alan grinned. I have a hunch I'll be seeing you all before then, Dad, I hope. Give everyone my best. So long, Dad. So long, Alan. He turned away and rapidly descended the ramp. Avoiding Kelleher and the cargo crew, for goodbyes would take too long, he trotted smoothly over the space field, feeling curiously light-hearted now. Part of the quest was over. Steve was back on board the Valhalla, but Alan knew the real work was just beginning. He would search for the hyperdrive. Perhaps Hawks would help him. Maybe he would succeed in his quest this time, too. He had some further plans in that event, but it was not time to think of them now. Hawks was still standing at the edge of the field, and there was a thoughtful smile on his face as Alan came running up to him. I guess you won your bet, Alan said, when he had his breath back. I almost always do. You owe me 100 credits, but I'll defer collection. They made the trip back to York City in virtual silence. Either Hawks was being too tactful to ask for the reasons for Alan's decision, or else, this seemed more likely, Alan decided, the gambler had already made some shrewd surmises and was waiting for time to bear him out. Hawks had known long before Alan himself realized it that he would not leave with the Valhalla. The Cavour hyperdrive, that was the rainbow's end Alan would chase now. He would accept Hawks' offer, become the gambler's protégé, learn a few things about life. The experience would not hurt him. And always in the front of his mind he would keep the ultimate goal of finding a space drive that would propel a ship faster than the speed of light. At the apartment in Hasbrook, Hawks offered him a drink. "To celebrate our partnership," he explained. Alan accepted the drink and tossed it down. It stung momentarily. He saw sadly he was never going to make much of a drinking man. He drew something from his pocket, and Hawks frowned. "What's that?" "My tally. Every spaceman has one. It's the only way we can keep track of our chronological age when we're on board ship." He showed it to Hawks. It read, Year 17, Day 3. Every 24 hours of subjective time that goes by, we click off another day. Every 365 days, another year is ticked off, but I guess I won't be needing this anymore. He tossed it in the disposal unit. I'm an Earther now. Every day that goes by is just one day. Objective time and subjective time are equal. Hawks grinned cheerfully.
A little plastic doodad to tell how old you are, eh? Well, that's all behind you now."
He pointed to a button in the wall.
"There's the operating control for your bed. I'll sleep in back where I did last night. First thing tomorrow, we'll get you a decent set of clothes so you can walk down the street without having people yell 'Spacer' at you. Then I want you to meet a few people, friends of mine, and then we start breaking you in at the Class C tables."
Yeah, sounds like a bad choice to me. The first few days of life with Hawks were exciting ones. The gambler bought Alan new clothing, modern stuff with self-sealing zippers and pressure buttons, made of filmy, clinging materials that were vastly more comfortable than the rough cloth of his Valhalla uniform. York City seemed less strange to him with each passing hour. He studied undertube routes and overshoot maps until he knew his way around the city fairly well. Each night, about 1800, they would eat, and then it was time to go to work. Hawk's routine brought him to 3 different Class A gambling parlors, twice each week. On the 7th day, he always rested. For the first week, Alan followed Hawks around, standing behind him and observing his technique. When the second week began, Alan was on his own, and he began to frequent Class C places near the Class A parlors Hawks used. But when he asked Hawks whether he should take out a free status registration, the gambler replied with a quick, snappish, "Not yet." "But why? I'm a professional gambler since last week. Why shouldn't I register?"
"Because you don't need to. It's not required."
But I want to. Gosh, Max, I sort of want to put my name down on something, just to show I belong here on Earth. I want to register." Hawks looked at him strangely, and it seemed to Alan there was menace in the calm blue eyes. In suddenly ominous tones he said, "I don't want you signing your name to anything, Alan, or registering for free status. Got that?" "Yes, but—"
"No buts. Got it."
Repressing his anger, Alan nodded. He was used to taking orders from his shipboard superiors and obeying them. Hawks probably knew best. In any case, he was dependent on the older man right now and did not want to anger him unnecessarily. Hawks was wealthy. It might take money to build a hyperdrive ship when the time came. Alan was flatly cold-blooded about it, and the concept surprised and amused him when he realized just how single-minded he had become since resigning from the Valhalla. He turned the single-mindedness to good use at the gaming tables first. During his initial 10 days as a professional, he succeeded in losing 700 credits of Hawks' money, even though he did manage to win a 300-credit stake one evening. But Hawks was not worried.
"You'll make the grade, Alan. A few more weeks, days maybe, while you learn the combinations, limber up your fingers, pick up the knack of thinking fast. You'll get there."
"I'm glad you're so optimistic." Alan felt downcast. He had dropped 300 credits that evening, and it seemed to him that his fumbling fingers would never learn to set up the combinations fast enough. He was just like Steve, a born loser, without the knack the game required. "Oh, well, it's your money."
"And I expect you to double it for me someday. I've got a 5-to-1 bet out now that you'll make Class B before fall."
Alan snorted doubtfully. In order to make Class B, he would have to make average winnings of 200 credits a night for 10 days running, or else win 3,000 credits within a month. It seemed a hopeless task. But as usual, Hawks won the bet. Alan's luck improved as May passed and June dwindled. At the beginning of July, he hit a hot streak when he seemed to be marching up to the winner's rostrum every other round, and the other Class C patrons began to grumble. The night he came home with 600 newly won credits, Hawks opened a drawer and took out a slim, sleek neutrino gun.
"You'd better carry this with you from now on," the gambler said.
What for?"
"They're starting to notice you now. I hear people talking. They know you're carrying cash out of the game parlors every night."
Alan held the cool grey weapon, whose muzzle could spit a deadly stream of energized neutrinos, undetectable, massless, and fatal. If I'm held up, I'm supposed to use this.
Just the first time, Hawks said. If you do the job right, you won't need to use it any more. There won't be a second time.
As it turned out, Alan had no need for the gun, but he carried it within easy reach whenever he left the apartment. His skill at the game continued to increase. It was, he saw, just like astrogation, and with growing confidence he learned to project his moves 3 and sometimes 4 numbers ahead. On a warm night in mid-July, the proprietor of the games hall Alan frequented most regularly stopped him as he entered.
"You're Donald, aren't you?"
That's right. Anything wrong?"
Nothing much, except that I've been tallying up your take the past 2 weeks. Comes close to 3,000 credits altogether, which means you're not welcome around this parlor anymore. Nothing personal, son. You'd better carry this with you the next time out.
Alan took the little card the proprietor offered him. It was made of grey plastic, and imprinted on it in yellow were the letters Class B. He had been promoted. Man. Now, boy, what is it about Hawks? What is it about Hawks? Okay, I thought he was going to put a lien on the spaceships I don't know, to get his money back. He's definitely. And why doesn't he want to put his name down on anything? Just speculating a little here. Maybe Hawks himself is that Cavour guy who invented the hyperdrive. Because for almost half of the book, half the book, they mentioned it at the very beginning, and then it was just never mentioned again until they got Steve back on the ship, and then it's just like, okay, it's all about the hyperdrive now. I don't know. Don't know. There's definitely something up with Hawks though. I could see him being the Carver guy who invented that hyperdrive, because he would say when they mentioned him in the beginning, they were like, yeah, he invented it, and he like vanished on a test run or something like that. I seem to recall that. I don't know. We'll continue. Okay, we still have an hour to go. I'm gonna see how far we get. Here we go. In Chapter 13. Things were not quite so easy in the Class B games parlors. Competition was rough. Some of the players were, like Alan, sharp newcomers just up from the bottom of the heap. Others were former Class A men who were sliding down again. "Is up there, Mr. Galen? What's going on?" "What's going on? Good to see you." Working our way through Starman's Quest. Very pulpy sci-fi. Yeah. And hobbling together our YouTube stream. Yeah. So I broadcast this from a different place now, and it's my little 4x4 studio. And little by little, all the little pieces are arriving. Should have the webcam up and going as soon as I need some like extension cables and stuff like that. Get the webcam going. Get the get some nice looking informational graphics up on the screen as well. Yeah, it's good. But yeah, we still have an hour of story time to go there, Mr. Galen. Yeah. How did your game end up, by the way? Your bee shooter. Very good. Yeah, I wouldn't mind giving that one a crack. You should get people to stream it on Twitch. That would be fun. That'd be fun. Oh yeah, so yeah, there's a bit of a delay too on the stream here, even though I have it set to low latency. Yeah, YouTube's low latency leaves a little to be desired. You're finishing it up today? Okay, nice. And it'll be uploaded to Itch.io, I think you said. That'll be cool. Okay, sounds good. Okay, we got to hop into chapter 13. Is your art stream still on? Is it back on a kind of a schedule thing there? I know you had a couple of weeks where things were kind of like all over the place. Yeah, I've kind of lost track of a lot of the morning streams that I usually follow. Okay, here we go. Chapter 13. Things were not quite so easy in the Class B games parlors. Competition was rough. Some of the players were, like Alan, sharp newcomers, just up from the bottom of the heap. Others were former Class A men who were sliding down again, but still did well enough to hang on in Class B. Every day, some of the familiar faces were gone, as one man after another failed to meet the continuing qualifications for the intermediary class. Alan won fairly steadily, and Hawks, of course, was a consistent winner on the Class A level. Alan turned his winnings over to the older man, who then allowed him to draw any cash he might need without question. The summer rolled on through August, hot and sticky, despite the best efforts of the local Weather Adjustment Bureau. The cloud seeders provided a cooling rain shower at about 0100 every night to wash away the day's grime. Alan was usually coming home at that time, and he would stand in the empty streets, letting the rain pelt down on him and enjoying it. Rain was a novelty for him. He had spent so much of his life aboard the starship that he had had little experience with it. He was looking forward to the coming of winter, and with it, snow. He hardly ever thought of the Valhalla. He disciplined himself to keep thoughts of the starship out of his mind, for he knew that once he began regretting his decision, there would be no stopping. Life on Earth was endlessly fascinating, and he was confident that someday soon he would get a chance to begin tracking down the Cavour hyperdrive. Hawks taught him many things: how to wrestle, how to cheat at cards, how to throw knives. None of the things Alan learned from Hawks were proper parts of the education of a virtuous young man, but on Earth, virtue was a negative accomplishment. You were either quick or dead. Mr. Hennings here is, hey there, what's going on? Good to see you, Mr. Henning. But on Earth, virtue was a negative accomplishment. You were either quick or dead. And until he had an opportunity to start work on the hyperdrive, Alan knew he had better learn how to survive on Earth. Hawks was a master of survival techniques. Alan was a good student. He had his first test on a muggy night early in September. He had spent his evening at the Lido, a flossy games parlor in the suburb of Ridgewood, and had come away with better than 700 credits, the second-best single night he had ever had. He felt good about things. Hawks was working at a parlor far across the city, and so they did not arrange to meet when the evening was over. Instead, they planned to come home separately. Usually they talked for an hour or two each night before turning in, Alan reviewing his evening's work, and having Hawks pick out the weak points in his technique and show him the mistakes he had made. Alan reached Hasbrook about 00:30 that evening. There was no moon, and in Hasbrook the street lighting was not as efficient as it was in the more respectable areas of York City. The streets were dark. Alan was perspiring heavily from the humidity, but the faint hum of the cloud seeders' helicopters could be heard. The evening rain was on the way. He decided to wait outside a while. The first drops splashed down at 00:45. Alan grinned gleefully as the cool rain washed away the sweat that clung to him, while pedestrians scurried for cover. Oh boy. Alan grinned gleefully as the cool rain washed away the sweat that clung to him. While pedestrians scurried for cover, he gloried in the downpour. Darkness lay all around. Alan heard sudden footsteps. A moment later he felt sharp pressure in the small of his back and a hand gripping his shoulder. A quiet voice said, "Hand over your cash, and you won't get hurt." Alan froze just an instant. Then the months of Hawk's training came into play. He wiggled his back tentatively to see whether the knife was penetrating his clothing. Good, it wasn't. In one quick motion he whirled and spun away, dancing off to the left and clubbing down sharply on his opponent's knife hand. A grunted exclamation of pain rewarded him. He stepped back 2 steps. As his attacker advanced, Alan drove a fist into his stomach and leaped lively away again. This time his hand emerged holding the neutrino gun. "Stand where you are or I'll burn you," he said quietly. The shadow-shrouded attacker made no move. Cautiously, Alan kicked the fallen knife out of his reach without lowering his gun. "Okay," Alan said. "Come on over here, into the light, where I can see who you are. I want to remember you." But to his astonishment, he felt strong arms slipping around his and pinioning him. A quick twist and his neutrino gun dropped from his numbed hands. The arms locked behind his back in an unbreakable full Nelson. Alan writhed, but it was no use. The hidden accomplice held him tightly, and now the other man came forward and efficiently went through his pockets. Alan felt more angry than afraid, but he wished Hawks or someone else would come along before this thing went too far. Suddenly, Alan felt the pressure behind his neck ease up. His captor was releasing him. He poised, debating whether or not to whirl and attack, when a familiar voice said, "Rule number 1, never leave your back unguarded for more than a half-second when you're being held up. You see what happens?" Alan was too stunned to reply for several moments. In a whisper, he said finally, "Max?" "Of course. And lucky for you, I'm who I am, too. John, step out here in the light where he can see you. Alan, meet John Byng, free status, Class B." The man who had originally attacked him came forward now into the light of the street glow. He was shorter than Alan, with a lean, almost fleshless face and a scraggly reddish-brown beard. He looked cadaverous. His eyeballs were stained a peculiar yellowish tinge. Alan recognized him. A Class B man he had seen several times at various parlors. It was not a face one forgot easily. Byng handed over the thick stack of bills he had taken from Alan. As he pocketed them, Alan said in some annoyance, "A very funny prank, Max, but suppose I had burned your friend's belly, or he had stabbed me." Hawks chuckled. "One of the risks of the game, I guess, but I know you too well to think that you had burned down an unarmed man, and John didn't intend to stab you. Besides, I was right here." "And what was the point of this little demonstration?" "Part of your education, my boy. I was hoping you'd be held up by one of the local gangs, but they didn't oblige, so I had to do it myself. With John's help, of course. Next time, remember that there may be an accomplice hiding in the shadows, and that you're not safe just because you've caught one man." Alan grinned. "Good point. And I guess this is the best way to learn it." The 3 of them went upstairs. Byng excused himself and vanished into the extra room almost immediately. Hawks whispered to Alan, "Johnny's a dream duster. How do you say that? Johnny's a dream duster. A narcocephaline addict. In the early stages, you can spot it by the yellowing of the eyeballs. Later on, it'll cripple him, but he doesn't worry about later on." Alan studied the small, lean man when he returned. Byng was smiling, a strange, unworldly smile. He held a small plastic capsule in his right hand. "Here's another facet of your education," he said. Oh, okay, this would be Bing. This would be Bing's, oh, good Lord. Too many people, getting all muddled up now. "Here's another facet of your education," he said. He looked at Hawks. "Is it okay?" Hawks nodded. Bing said, "Take a squint at this capsule, boy. It's dream dust. Narcocephrine. That's my kick." He tossed the capsule nonchalantly to Alan, who caught it and held it at arm's distance as if it were a live viper. It contained a yellow powder. "You twist the cap and and sniff a little," Hawks said, "but don't try it unless you hate yourself real bad. Johnny can testify to that."
Alan frowned. What does the stuff do?"
"It's a stimulant, a nerve stimulant. Enhances perception. Is made from a weed that grows only in dry, arid places. Comes from Epsilon Eridani 4 originally, but the galaxy's biggest plantation is here in the Sahara. It's habit-forming and expensive."
"How much of it do you have to take to get the habit?" Bing's thin lips curled in a cynical scowl.
"One sniff, and the drug takes all your worries away. You're 9 feet tall, and the world's your plaything when you're up on dream dust. Everything you look at has 6 colors."
Bitterly, Bing said,
"Just one catch. After about a year, you stop feeling the effect, but not the craving. That stays with you forever. Every night, one good sniff. At 100 credits a sniff. And there's no cure."
Alan shuddered. He had seen dream dust addicts in the advanced state, withered, palsied old men of 40, unable to eat, crippled, drying up and nearing death. All that for a year's pleasure.
"Johnny used to be a Starman," Hawk said suddenly. "That's why I picked him for our little stunt tonight. I thought it was about time I introduced you two."
Alan's eyes widened. "Oh, what ship?"
"Galactic Queen. A dream dust peddler came wandering through the Enclave one night and let me have a—"
"Oh, that's okay." That is, Bing speaking.
"Galactic Queen. A dream dust peddler came wandering through our Enclave one night and let me have a free sniff. Generous of him."
"And you became an addict?"
5 minutes later. So my ship left without me. That was 11 years ago, Earth time. Figure it out. 100 credits a night for 11 years.
Alan felt cold inside. It could have happened to him, he thought, that free sniff. Bing's thin shoulders were quivering. The advanced stage of addiction was starting to set in. Bing was only the first of Hawks' many friends that Alan met in the next 2 weeks. Hawks was the center of a large group of men in free status, not all of whom knew each other, but who all knew Hawks. Alan felt a sort of pride in being the protege of such an important and widely known man as Max Hawks, until he started discovering what sort of people Hawks' friends were. There was Lorne Hollis, the loansman, one of the men Steve had borrowed from. Hollis was a chubby, almost greasy individual, with flat, milky, gray eyes and a cold, chilling smile. Alan shook hands with him, and then felt like wiping off his hand. Hollis came to see them often. Another frequent visitor was Mike Kovac of the Bryson Syndicate, a sharp-looking businessman type in ultra-modern suits, who spoke clearly and well, and whose specialty was forgery. There was Al Weber, an amiable, soft-spoken little man who owned a fleet of small ion-drive cargo ships that plied the space lines between Earth and Mars, and who also exported dream dust to the colony on Pluto, where the weed could not be grown.
7 or 8 others showed up occasionally at Hawke's apartment. Alan was introduced to them all, and then generally dropped out of the conversation, which usually consisted of reminiscences and gossip about people he did not know. But as the days passed, one thing became evident. Hawkes might not be a criminal himself, but certainly most of his friends operated on the far side of the law. Hawkes had seen to it that they stayed away from the apartment during the first few months of Alan's earther education, but now that the ex-Starman was an accomplished gambler and fairly well skilled in self-defense, all of Hawkes' old friends were returning once again. Day by day, Alan increasingly realized how innocent and childlike a Starman's life was. The Valhalla was a placid little world of 176 people, bound together by so many ties that there was rarely any conflict. Here, on Earth, though, life was tough and hard. He was lucky. He had stumbled into Hawkes early in his wanderings. With a little less luck, he might have had the same sort of life Steve had, or John Byng. It was not fun to think about that. Usually, when Hawkes had friends visiting him late at night, Alan would sit up for a while, listening, and then excuse himself and get some sleep. As he lay in bed, he could hear low whispering, and once he had woken toward morning and heard the conversation still going. He strained his ears, but did not pick up anything. One night, early in October, he had come home from the games parlor, and finding nobody home, had gone immediately to sleep. Sometime later, he heard Hawkes and his friends come in, but he was too tired to get out of bed and greet them. He rolled over and went back to sleep. But later that night, he felt hands touching him, and he opened an eye to see Hawkes bending over him.
"It's me, Max. Are you awake?"
"No," Alan muttered indistinctly. Hawkes shook him several times.
"Come on, get up and put some clothes on. Some people here want to talk to you."
Only half comprehending, Alan clambered unwillingly from bed, dressed and splashed cold water in his face. He followed Hawkes back inside. The living room was crowded. 7 or 8 men were there, the ones Alan thought of as the inner circle of Hawkes' cronies: Johnny Byng, Mike Kovac, Al Weber, Lorne Hollis, and some others. Sleepily, Alan nodded at them and took a seat, wondering why Hawkes had dragged him out of bed for this. Hawkes looked at him sharply.
"Alan, you know all these people, don't you?"
Alan nodded. He was still irritated at Hawkes. He had been sound asleep.
"You are now facing 90% of what we've come to call the Hawkes Syndicate," Hawkes went on. "These 8 gentlemen and myself have formed the organization recently for a certain specific purpose. More of that in a few minutes. What I got you out here to tell you was that there's room in our organization for one more man, and that you fit the necessary qualifications."
"Me?" Hawkes smiled.
"You. We've all been watching you since you came to live with me, testing you, studying you. You're adaptable, strong, intelligent. You learn fast. We had a little vote tonight and decided to invite you in."
Alan wondered if he was still asleep or not. What was all this talk of syndicates? He looked round the circle and realized that this bunch could be up to no good.
Hawkes said, "Tell him about it, Johnny."
Byng leaned forward and blinked his drug-stained eyes. In a quiet voice, almost a purr, he said,
"It's really very simple. We're going to stage a good old-fashioned hold-up. It's a proposition that'll net us each about 1 million credits. Even with the 10-way split, it ought to go off pretty easy. But we need you in on it. As a matter of fact, I'd say you were indispensable to the project, Alan."
All right. That was what, the end of chapter 13? Man, we'll continue with the next chapter in just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Have a little sip of water. But yeah, man, the book sure has taken its sweet old time getting down to the Hawks business. And I knew he was going to be too good to be true. Alrighty. Man, I'm going to have to bring a second water jug in for this thing here. This one here is almost completely gone. Yeah, my studio is, gets a little warm. Gets a little warm. It's okay, though, because it sounds good. Alrighty. So far, so good. Just having a quick peek at Discord, make sure I'm not missing anything. No, I'm not missing anything. Very good, very good. Okay. Alan's going to be a dream dust runner, you reckon? I don't know. Don't know. Do you know what? I mean, Hawks has invested so much in him, and months and months have gone by. That yeah, I mean, Alan's got, he's under a lot of pressure. He owes Hawks a lot. Also, by this time, he's been on Earth, like relatively speaking, longer than. Oh, well, actually, I don't know. No, I was going to say, because, okay, so Alan was on the Valhalla. When Steve jumped ship, they were away for, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. And when they returned to Earth, 9 years had passed. So, well, actually, I guess if everyone... no, so he's been here on Earth now. Steve's back on the ship. So I guess only like a tiny period of time has passed on the Valhalla, I guess, in the meantime. Galen, yeah, it's going to be very useful for me in a lot of ways. It's really a numbers thing. I can talk about it in more detail later, because I do need to jump back into the book. But it did really, really well on Mixer, and not well at all on Twitch, and on and so yeah, I think it's going to be better here because I can leave an archive behind, and because on Twitch, like your videos disappear after 14 days. But yeah, long answer is yes. I think I'm going to be able to build up a like a fairly decent live crew, but as well, I mean it's there's a lot I don't want to talk about right now. But yeah, I think it will be better overall. Yeah, not for gaming. Oh my lord, no. Copyright strikes like you wouldn't believe on the YouTube gaming section. It's crazy. Yeah, I don't even know how anyone does gaming on YouTube without losing their accounts. Man. I could condense them and yes. Well, yeah. Yeah. So yeah. There's other things I need to do as well. I need to reorganize my Patreon, which is kind of very tied. Which is small, but that's also tied into like Mixer or Twitch thing there. I need to revamp and reorganize that. For actually, there's a bunch of things I don't really want to talk about on the stream. But yeah, it's yeah. I'll talk to you later. Maybe I'll hit you up on Discord or something like that. I can talk a bit about that. Actually, at the beginning of this, actually, I need to figure out how to easily just trim the beginning of these things, because I do talk for 3-4 minutes before we get started on it, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me yesterday how to trim the beginning off, and actually save it. I know I've done it before, but it is very unintuitive, YouTube's editing tools. Yeah. Okay, anyway, let's get on with it. Chapter 14. Chapter 14. Hawks took over, explaining the proposition to a now very much awake Alan. This is Hawks taking over. Okay.
There's going to be a currency transfer at the World Reserve Bank downtown next Friday. At least 10 million credits are going to be picked up by an armored truck and taken to branch banks for distribution. Hollis here happens to have found out the wave patterns of the robo-guards who'll be protecting the currency shipment, and Al Weber has some equipment that can paralyze robo-guards if we know their operational wavelength. So it's a simple matter to leave the car unprotected. We wait till it's loaded, then blank out the robots, seize the human guards, and drive away with the truck.
Alan frowned thoughtfully. Why am I so indispensable to this business? He had no desire to rob banks or anything else.
Because you're the only one of us who isn't registered on the central directory. You don't have any televector number. You can't be traced.
Suddenly Alan understood. So that's why you didn't let me register. You've been grooming me for this all along. Hawks nodded.
As far as Earth is concerned, you don't exist. If any of us drove off with that truck, all they need to do is plot the truck's coordinates and follow the televector patterns of the man who's driving it. Capture is inevitable that way. But if you're aboard the truck, there's no possible way of tracing your route. Get it?
I get it, Alan said slowly. But I don't like it, he added silently. I want to think about the deal a little longer, though. Let me sleep on it. I'll tell you tomorrow whether I'll go through with it. Puzzled expressions appeared on the faces of Hawks' 8 guests, and Weber started to say something, but Hawks hastily cut him off.
The boy's a little sleepy, that's all. He needs time to get used to the idea of being a millionaire. I'll call each of you in the morning, okay?
The 8 were shepherded out of the apartment rapidly, and when they were gone, Hawks turned to face Alan. Gone now was the bland friendliness, gone the warm-hearted brotherliness of the older man. His lean face was cold and businesslike now, and his voice was harsh as he said,
"What's this talk of thinking it over? Who said you had any choice about this thing?"
"Don't I have any say in my own life?" Alan asked hotly. "Suppose I don't want to be a bank robber. You didn't tell me—"
"I didn't need to. Listen, boy, I didn't bring you in here for my health. I brought you in because I saw you had the potential for this job. I've coddled you along for more than 3 months now, given you a valuable education in how to get along on this planet. Now I'm asking you to pay me back a little. Being told the truth, you're indispensable to this project. Your personal feelings are irrelevant just now."
"Who says?"
"I do."
Alan stared coldly at Hawks' transformed face. "Max, I didn't bargain for a share in your bank-robbing syndicate. I don't want any part of it. Let's call it quits right now. I've turned over quite a few thousand credits of my winnings to you. Give me 500 and keep the rest. It's your pay for my room and board and instruction the last 3 months. You go your way, I'll go mine." Hawks laughed sharply.
"Just as simple as that. I pocket your winnings and you walk out of here. How dumb do you think I am? You know the names of the syndicate, you know the plans, you know everything. A lot of people would pay big money for an advance tip on this bit."
He shook his head.
"I'll go my way, and you'll go it too, Alan. Or else. You know what that or else means?"
Angrily, Alan said, "You'd kill me, too, if I backed down now. Friendship doesn't mean a thing to you. Help us rob a bank or else." Hawk's expression changed again. He smiled warmly, and when he spoke his voice was almost wheedling. "Listen, Alan, we've been planning this thing for months. I put down 7,000 to clear your brother, just so I'd be sure of getting your cooperation. I tell you, there's no danger. I didn't mean to threaten you, but try to see my side of it. You have to help out."
Alan looked at him curiously. "How come you're so hot to rob the bank, Max? You earn a fortune every night. You don't need 1,000,000 more credits."
"No, I don't. But some of them do. Johnny Bing does, and Kovac, too. He owes Bryson 30,000. But I organized this scheme."
Hawks was pleading now.
"Alan, I'm bored. Deadly bored. Gambling isn't gambling for me. I'm too good. I never lose except when I want to. So I need to get my kicks someplace else. This is it. But it won't come off without you."
They were silent for a moment. Alan realized that Hawks and his group were desperate men. They would never let him live if he refused to cooperate. He had no choice at all. It was disillusioning to discover that Hawks had taken him in mostly because he would be useful in a robbery. He tried to tell himself that this was a jungle world where morality didn't matter, and that the 1,000,000 credits he'd gain would help finance hyperdrive research. But those were thin arguments that held no conviction. There was no justification for what he was going to do, none whatsoever. But Hawks held him in a cleft stick. There was no way out. He had fallen among thieves, and willy-nilly he would be forced to become one himself. "All right," he said bitterly. "I'll drive the getaway truck for you. But after it's over, I'll take my share and get out. I won't want to see you again." Hawks seemed to look hurt, but he masked the emotion quickly enough.
"That's up to you, Alan. But I'm glad you gave in. It would have been rough on us both otherwise. Suppose we get some sleep."
Alan slept poorly during what was left of the night. He kept mulling the same thoughts round and round endlessly in his head, until he wished he could unhinge the front of his skull and let the thoughts somehow escape. It irritated him to know that Hawks had taken him in primarily because he could fit the qualifications for a plan concocted long before, and not for his own sake. All the intensive training the gambler had given him had been directed not merely towards toughening Alan, but toward preparing him for the role he would play in the projected robbery. He felt unhappy about the robbery, too. The fact that he was being coerced into taking part made him no less a criminal, and that went against all his long-ingrained codes of ethics. He would be just as guilty as Hawks or Weber, and there was no way out. There was no sense brooding over it, he decided finally. When it was all over, he would have enough money to begin aiming for his real goal, development of a workable hyperspace drive. He would break completely with Hawks, move to some other city perhaps. If his quest were successful, it would in some measure be an atonement for the crime he was going to commit. Only in some measure, though. The week passed slowly, and Alan did poorly at his nightly work. His mind was anywhere but on the flashing games board, and the permutations and combinations eluded him. He lost, though not heavily. Each night the 10 members of the syndicate met at Hawk's apartment and planned each step of the crime in great detail, drilling and re-drilling until it was second nature for each man to recite his particular part in the robbery. Alan's was at once the simplest and the most difficult. He would have nothing to do until the others had finished their parts, and then he would have to board the armored car and outrace any pursuers. He was to drive the car far outside city limits, where he would be met and relieved of the cash by Bing and Hollis. Then he was to lose the truck somewhere and return to the city by public transit. The day of the robbery dawned cold and clear. An autumn chill was in the air. Alan felt some anticipatory nervousness, but he was calmer than he expected to be.
almost fatalistically calm. By nightfall he would be a wanted criminal. He wondered whether it would be worth it, even for the 1,000,000 credits. Perhaps it would be best to defy Hawks and make some sort of escape try. But Hawks, as always a shrewd judge of human character, seemed obviously aware that Alan was wavering. He kept a close watch over him, never allowing him to stray. Hawks was taking no chances. He was compelling Alan to take part in the robbery. The currency transfer was scheduled to take place at 12:40, according to the inside information that Hollis had somehow obtained. Shortly after noon, Hawks and Alan left the apartment and boarded the Undertube, their destination the downtown section of York City where the World Reserve Bank was located. They reached the bank about 12:30. The armored truck was parked outside, looking sleek and impregnable, and 4 massive robo-guards stood watch, one by each wheel. There were 3 human policemen, too, but they were strictly for effect. In case of any trouble, the robo-guards were expected to handle the rough work. The bank was a mighty edifice indeed, over 100 stories high, rising in sweeping setbacks to a point where its tapering top was lost in the shimmering noonday sky. It was, Alan knew, the center of global commerce. Armed guards were bringing packages of currency from within the bank and were placing them on the truck. Alan's heart raced. The streets were crowded with office workers out for lunch. Could he get away with it? It was all precisely synchronized. As Hawks and Alan strolled toward the bank, Alan caught sight of Kovac lounging across the street, reading a telefax sheet. None of the others were visible. Weber, Alan knew, was at this moment sitting in an office overlooking the bank entrance, staring out the window at the scene below. At precisely 12:40, Weber was to throw the switch on the wave damper that would paralyze the 4 robo-guards. The instant the robo-guards froze, the other conspirators would go into action. Jensen, McGuire, Freeman, and Smith, donning masks, would leap for the 3 human guards of the truck and pin them to the ground. Bing and Hawks, who would enter the bank a moment later, would stage an impromptu fist fight with each other just inside the main entrance, thereby creating confusion and making it difficult for reinforcement guards to get past them and into the street. "What's up there, Obsidian Empire? Hey, what's going on? Nice to meet you." Backing up. Bing and Hawks, who would enter the bank a moment before, would stage an impromptu fist fight with each other just inside the main entrance, thereby creating confusion and making it difficult for reinforcement guards to get past them and into the street. Just outside the door, Hollis and Kovacs would lurk. As the quartet pounced on the truck's guards, they would sprint across and yank the driver out of the cab. Then Alan would enter quickly from the other side and drive off, while the remaining 9 would vanish into the crowd in as many different directions as possible. Bing and Hollis, if they got away, would head for the rendezvous to meet Alan and take the cash from him. If it went off properly, the whole thing should be less than 15 seconds, from the time Weber threw the switch to the time Alan drove away with the truck. If it went off properly. What's up with Tobey Maguire? The seconds crawled by. The time was 12:35 now. At 12:37, Hawks and Bing sauntered into the bank from opposite directions. 3 minutes to go. Alan's false calm deserted him. He pictured all sorts of possible calamities. 12:38. Everyone's watch was synchronized to the second. 12:39. 12:39:30. 30 seconds to go. Alan took his position in a crowd of bystanders as prearranged. 15 seconds to go. 10. 5. 12:40. The robo-guards were in the act of directing the locking of the truck. The loading had been carried out precisely on schedule. The truck was shut and sealed. The robo-guards froze. Weber had been right on time. Alan tensed, caught up in the excitement of the moment and thinking now only of the part he was to play. The three policemen glanced at each other in some confusion. Jensen and McGuire came leaping out at them, and the robo-guards returned to life. The sound of blaster shots was heard within the bank. Alan whirled, startled. 4 guards came racing out of the building, blasters drawn. What had happened to Hawks and Bing? Why weren't they obstructing the entrance, as it had been arranged? The street was a scene of wild confusion now. People milled everywhere. Alan saw Jensen writhing in the steel grip of a robo-guard. Had Weber's device failed? Evidently so. Alan was unable to move. He saw Freeman and McGuire streaking wildly down the street, with police in keen pursuit. Hollis stood staring dumbly inside the bank door. Alan saw Kovac come running toward him. "Everything's gone wrong," Kovac whispered harshly. "The cops were waiting for us. Bing and Hawks are dead. Come on, run if you want to save yourself." Man. Everything went downhill fast there. Good gracious. Well, that was the end of Chapter 14. That puts us exactly 75% into this. So we will finish this tomorrow. Yeah. We still have time for a short story or so. But we will finish off Starman's quest tomorrow. Yeah. Making a pretty good progress through it. 25% of it per day. Man, okay. Well, let's. I'm going to take a little drink of the old water there. Man, I can't wait till my webcam gets set up in here properly again. What would? Well, it's 11:47, so we got about 15 minutes to go. Let's pick something from. Do I have Time in the Gods here? All right, let me. I don't. Oh boy, I don't have any. I just need to turn this screen off for a second. Don't worry, I'll be right back. Yeah, I need like little alternate scenes and stuff. Time. Yeah, so this is a completely different. Looking for the time in the Gods. There it is, right there. Yeah, I need my OBS set up properly on this this PC over here. This is not the one I normally stream from. Little by little, though, little by little, we're getting there. Okay. Yeah. So Obsidian Empire. What? Tell me about your stream. What do you do? Oh, that's the wrong button. Man, the delay on this is terrible. All right. By the way, this one here, this short story, we read this, I think it was on Monday, I think. The Cave of Kai. This is probably my current most favorite Lord Dunsany story, actually, The Cave of Kai. That was so good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 18. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. That's the same as well. 1. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll go. We're gonna run a little. We're gonna run a little late with this one here. The Sorrow of Search. Sorrow of Search. We'll try this one. Oh, you don't stream a lot? Okay. Bum bum. All right, yeah, let's do this one. The Sorrow of Search. So this will probably take us through to, 20 past 12. So we're going to run late by 20 minutes. That's fine. That's fine. But yeah, for those who are going to be tuning in tomorrow for the last 25% of Starman's quest, we'll be finishing that novel tomorrow. We'll be starting that at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And we do this Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Usually read for about 2 hours. Sometimes go a little longer, just like we're going to do today. Yeah, very cool. It's been an interesting move here over onto YouTube. It's going to work out very well. Yeah, I'm still piecing this new thing together here because I'm streaming from a different location. I'm over in my studio right now, my little humble studio, 4x4. I had to get set up with a new PC and everything like that over here. It's crazy. Okay, so I guess we're continuing the story of the King Kanazar, who we just learned about in the previous story, The Cave of Kai, which is, boy, that was just an amazing story. So let's continue. The Sorrow of Search. It is told also of King Kanazar how he bowed very low unto the gods of old. None bowed so low unto the gods of old as did King Kanazar. One day the king, returning from the worship of the gods of old, and from bowing before them in the temple of the gods, commanded their prophets to appear before him, saying, I would know somewhat concerning the gods. Then came the prophets before King Kanazar, burdened with many books, to whom the king said, It is not in the books. Thereat the prophets departed, bearing away with them 1,000 methods, well devised in books, whereby men may gain wisdom of the gods. One alone remained, a master prophet who had forgotten books, to whom the king said, The gods of old are mighty. And answered the master prophet, Very mighty are the gods of old. Then the king said, There are no gods but the gods of old. And answered the prophet, There are none other. And they two being alone within the palace, the king said, Tell me aught concerning gods or men, if aught of the truth be known. Then said the master prophet, Far and white and straight lieth the road to knowing, and down it, in the heat and dust, go all wise people of the earth. But in the fields before they come to it, the very wise lie down, or pluck the flowers. By the side of the road to knowing, O king, it is hard and hot. Stand many temples, and in the doorway of every temple stand many priests, and they cry to the travellers that weary of the road, crying to them, This is the end. And in the temples are the sounds of music, and from each roof arises the savour of pleasant burning, and all look at a cool temple, whichever temple they look at, or hear the hidden music. Turn in to see whether it be indeed the end. And such as find that their temple is not indeed the end, set forth again upon the dusty road, stopping at each temple as they pass, for fear they miss the end, or striving onwards on the road, and see nothing in the dust, till they can walk no longer, and are taken, worn and weary of their journey, into some other temple, by a kindly priest, who shall tell them that this also is the end. Neither on that road may a man gain any guiding from his fellows, for only one thing that they say is surely true, when they say, Friend, we can see nothing for the dust. and of the dust that hides the way, much has been there since ever that road began, and some is stirred up by the feet of all that travel upon it, and more arises from the temple doors. And, O king, it were better for thee, travelling upon that road, to rest, when one hearest one calling, "This is the end," with the sounds of music behind him. And if in the dust and darkness thou pass by Lo and Mush, and the pleasant temple of Kynash, or Sheenath with his opal smile, or Sho with his eyes of agate, yet Shiloh and Menathetep, Gezo, and Aramund, and Slig are still before thee, and the priests of their temples will not forget to call thee. And, O king, it is told that only one discerned the end, and passed by 3,000 temples, and the priests of the last were like the priests of the first, and all said that their temple was at the end of the road, and the dark of the dust lay over them all, and all were very pleasant, and only the road was weary. And in some were many gods, and in a few only one. And in some the shrine was empty, and all had many priests, and in all the travellers were happy as they rested. And into some his fellow travellers tried to force him, and when he said, "I will travel further," many said, "This man lies, for the road ends here." And he that travelled to the end hath told that when the thunder was heard upon the road, there arose the sound of the voices of all the priests as far as he could hear, crying, "Hearken to Shiloh! Hear Mush! Lo, Kynash! The voice of Sho! Menathetep is angry! Hear the word of Slig!" And far away along the road one cried to the traveller that Sheenath stirred in his sleep. "O king, this is very doleful. It is told that that traveller came at last to the utter end, and there was a mighty gulf, and in the darkness at the bottom of the gulf one small god crept, no bigger than a hare, whose voice came crying in the cold, 'I know not.' And beyond the gulf was naught, only the small god crying. And he that travelled to the end fled backwards for a great distance, till he came to temples again, and entering one, where a priest cried, 'This is the end,' lay down and rested on a couch. There Yush sat silent, carved with an emerald tongue and 2 great eyes of sapphire, and there many rested and were happy. And an old priest, coming from comforting a child, came over to that traveller who had seen the end, and said to him, 'This is Yush, and this is the end of wisdom.' And the traveller answered, 'Yush is very peaceful, and this indeed the end.' O king, wouldst thou hear more?" And the king said, "I would hear all." And the master prophet answered, "There was also another prophet, and his name was Shorn, who had such reverence for the gods of old, that he became able to discern their forms by starlight as they strode, unseen by others, among men. Each night did Shaun discern the forms of the gods, and every day he taught concerning them, till men in Averon knew how the gods appeared, all grey against the mountains, and how Rug was higher than Mount Scagadon, and how Skun was smaller, and how Asgul leaned forward as he strode, and how Trodath peered about him with small eyes. But one night, as Shaun watched the gods of old by starlight, he faintly discerned some other gods that sat far up the slopes of the mountains, in the stillness behind the gods of old. And the next day he hurled his robe away that he wore as Averon's prophet, and said to his people, "There be gods greater than the gods of old. 3 gods seen faintly on the hills by starlight, looking on Averon." And Shaun set out and travelled many days, and many people followed him. And every night he saw more clearly the shapes of the 3 new gods who sat silent when the gods of old were striding among men. On the higher slopes of the mountain Shaun stopped with all his people, and there they built a city, and worshipped the gods whom only Shaun could see, seated above them on the mountain. And Shaun taught how the gods were like grey streaks of light seen before dawn, and how the god on the right pointed upward toward the sky, and how the god on the left pointed downward toward the ground, but the god in the middle slept. And in the city Shaun's followers built 3 temples. The one on the right was a temple for the young, the one on the left a temple for the old, and the third was a temple for the old. What? Okay. And in the city Shaun's followers built 3 temples. The one on the right was a temple for the young, and the one on the left a temple for the old, and the third was a temple for the old, and the third was a temple with doors closed and barred. Therein none ever entered. One night as Shaun watched before the 3 gods, sitting like pale light against the mountain, he saw on the mountain's summit 2 gods that spake together and pointed, mocking the gods of the hill. Only he heard no sound. The next day Shaun set out, and a few followed him, to climb to the mountain's summit in the cold, to find the gods who were so great that they mocked at the silent 3. And near the 2 gods they halted and built for themselves huts. Also they built a temple, wherein the 2 were carved by the hand of Shaun, with their heads turned towards each other, with mockery on their faces, and their fingers pointing, and beneath them were carved the 3 gods of the hill, as actors making sport. None remembered now Asgul, Trodath, Skun, and Rug, the gods of old. For many years Shaun and his few followers lived in their huts upon the mountain's summit, worshipping gods that mocked, and every night Shaun saw the 2 gods by starlight as they laughed to one another in the silence. And Shaun grew old. One night, as his eyes were turned towards the 2, he saw across the mountains in the distance a great god seated in the plain and looming enormous to the sky, who looked with angry eyes towards the 2 as they sat and mocked. Then said Shaun to his people, the few that had followed him thither, "Alas, that we may not rest, but beyond us in the plain sitteth the one true God, and he is wroth with mocking. Let us therefore leave these two that sit and mock, and let us find the truth in the worship of that greater God, who even though he kill, shall yet not mock us. But the people answered, Thou hast taken from us many gods, and taught us now to worship gods that mock. And if there is laughter on their faces as we die, lo, thou alone canst see it, and we would rest. But 3 men who had grown old with following followed still. And down the steep mountain on the further side Shaun led them, saying, Now we shall surely know. And the 3 old men answered, We shall know indeed, O last of all the prophets. That night the 2 gods, mocking at their worshippers, mocked not at Shaun, nor his 3 followers, who, coming to the plain, still travelled on, till they came at last to a place where the eyes of Shaun at night could closely see the vast form of their God. And beyond them, as far as the sky, there lay a marsh. There they rested, building such shelters as they could, and said to one another, This is the end, for Shaun discerneth that there are no more gods, and before us lieth the marsh, and old age hath come upon us. And since they could not labor to build a temple, Shaun carved upon a rock all that he saw by starlight of the great God of the plain, so that if ever others forsook the gods of old, because they saw beyond them the greater 3, and should thence come to knowledge of the twain that mocked, and should yet persevere in wisdom, till they saw by starlight him whom Shaun named the ultimate God, they should still find there upon the rock what one had written concerning the end of the search. For 3 years Shaun carved upon the rock, and rising one night from carving, saying, Now is my labour done, he saw in the distance 4 greater gods beyond the ultimate God. Proudly, in the distance, beyond the marsh, these gods were tramping together, taking no heed of the God upon the plain. Then said Shaun to his 3 followers, Alas, that we know not yet, for there be gods beyond the marsh. None would follow Shaun, for they said that old age must end all quests, and that they would rather wait there in the plain for death than that he should pursue them across the marsh. Then Shaun said farewell to his followers, saying, You have followed me well, since ever we forsook the gods of old to worship greater gods. Farewell. It may be that your prayers at evening shall avail when you pray to the God of the plain, but I must go onward, for there be gods beyond. So Shaun went down into the marsh, and for 3 days struggled through it, and on the 3rd night saw the 4 gods not very far away, yet could not discern their faces. All the next day Shaun toiled on to see their faces by starlight, but ere the night came up, or one star shone, at set of sun, Shaun fell down before the feet of his 4 gods. The stars came out, and the faces of the 4 shone bright and clear, but Shaun saw them not, for the labour of toiling and seeing was over for Shaun, and lo, they were Asgul, Trodath, Skun, and Rug, the gods of old. Then said the king, It is well that the sorrow of search cometh only to the wise, for the wise are very few." Also the king said, "Tell me this thing, O prophet, who are the true gods?" The master prophet answered, "Let the king command.